Thank you, Rick. Everyone hear me okay? We're going to talk a little bit about things that are happening around the world in the space of loyalty, specifically loyalty programs. And I want to bring it back to what is the difference between some of the things that are happening in the US and some that aren't. So as you look at the agenda here, it's going to be a trip around the globe. We're going to talk about specific loyalty models, how they actually work, some of the key elements of making them successful. We want to talk about one specific type of program in a little more detail, and that's a coalition model, and compare some of the coalition aspects to other proprietary metrics that occur in programs. And lastly, getting the elephants to dance. So like Bill, who swims with sharks, we're going to be bringing elephants right into this room before the end of this half hour. How to grow if you go and how to play if you stay. I think that one of the pieces of information I'm going to share with you in this next section is about some research that a sister company of ours did, Colloquy, who did the attitudes and perceptions of everything from loyalty programs to the economy to how, in fact, emerging economies compare versus those of developed nations. And specifically, they just completed the survey, and it was across thousands of customers in 6 markets. We looked at developed nations, such as US, Canada, and Australia, and then emerging economies such as Brazil, China, and India. And it's fascinating in terms of the results that have come out of these. And just even hearing some of the trends that we've heard over the last couple of days, I'm going to show you a few of the specific results, but here's the top line. And the top line is as follows, is that the emerging markets have energy, engagement, and enthusiasm. It is incredible in terms of how these organizations and the CMOs and the key executives of these organizations are making decisions. Whereas, not in all cases, but whereas in some of the developed nations, we see that the loyalty programs are tired, that customers are becoming turned off, and in many cases, they're becoming tuned out. So those are the top lines in which we look at this. And I'll share one story with you. We have an ownership stake in a very successful program in Brazil. And with the energy and enthusiasm, one of the things that our executive partners tell us is to say, you guys in North America spend hours and hours and weeks and months making sure it's 100% right, and then you go do it 3 more times. Our strategy is simple. We get 50% of what we think will be right, and we figure out the next 50% along the way. And there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around that. Are there mistakes made? Absolutely there are mistakes made. However, what happens, though, is they learn as a group together, and it creates that energy. And it's funny that executives within, whether it's retailers, credit card companies, etc., all feel the same way. So one of the things that, as we think about loyalty program strategies and how we're going to get more yield out of the programs, how do we create that engagement, that enthusiasm, not just from the customer standpoint, but around the organizations themselves? So here's a few top-line things, starting very broad with, what kind of level of optimism do you have for your country in the coming decade? And if you think about this, it's almost a sad state to see how the emerging economies are so turned on by the optimism by which their country is experiencing today and how they look forward to that over the next several years. So right off the bat, 2 to 4 times higher in terms of the level of optimism about the economy and about the country they live in versus some of the developed nations. A second point, which I think is really worth spending a bit of time on, is the huge middle-class growth, that burgeoning growth of middle-class nations. And you might not be able to see the actual data, but the blue bars on the right show that from the year 2000 to 2030, almost 1 billion additional people in that middle-class sector are going to evolve and be classified in that state. Now, when you look at the emerging economies, what does that mean? That means in a lot of cases, these people are owning homes for the first time. They're owning cell phones for the first time. They're getting credit cards for the first time. They are now starting to understand how to contribute to the way in which they spend money as a family and as a group. And it's incredible when you start to look at this to say, if we don't understand and be able to know how to market to a segment that's going to be so extensive in the future, you're certainly going to be missing out on something. So second big point here is a huge growth of the middle class. We then got into a little more specific detail on loyalty programs. How many people in developed nations versus emerging nations feel that reward programs are going to be impactful? that they're interested, that they're going to potentially desire to change the behavior of consumers. And you can see the data here, twice as high in Brazil, India, and China as it is in the developed countries. And again, that says there's an openness. There's an openness to be able to go in and look at that specific information. Then they took it one step further and said, okay, now that I'm interested in loyalty programs, what's my response to relevance of communication? And you can see here it's really off the charts in terms of, again, how those emerging nations are looking at the relevancy of communication and what they're looking for in getting communication. So this is yet another opportunity as you start thinking about these markets to look at the expectations of what consumers are having for us as loyalty marketers and you as business leaders in, again, your various industry sectors. The last one is the, oh, sorry, I went backwards there. So aside from the research, there's 5 key takeaways that we went into detail which I want to summarize. And I think it's pretty important in terms of thinking that these are the top 5 summaries that came out of communications with consumers in these markets. Number 1 is privacy. Privacy is a concern and it's widespread. You can see privacy even in the developed nations is high. I think it's important when you think of privacy to distinguish between privacy and security, because quite often there's an element of concern from the consumer standpoint of what are you going to do with my information, my data. I think the presentation or the video that Rick showed at the outset really did capture that well. Next, though, is what about the security of that data? Who has access to it? I'm going to talk about a recommendation on how to approach data, regardless of your loyalty program type, a little later on here. But number 1, privacy, big concern. Number 2, the reliance on word of mouth is much higher in the emerging economies. Word of mouth, again, we see it when we're down in the Brazilian marketplace. People participate, they join these loyalty programs, they start to redeem, and all of a sudden that word of mouth just bubbles. And of course, social networking and all the devices that are available for communication these days have caused that word of mouth to accelerate at a rapid pace. But that was the second big emerging trend that came out of this. Next was, as no surprise, high engagement with electronic media. Apparently, Nokia says that India is the fastest growing cell phone market in the world, and they have more units per customer in India than they do in almost the rest of the world, and they're number 1 or 2 in terms of cell phone penetration worldwide. The interesting play here, though, is that a lot of what the market is doing in these emerging economies is buying prepaid phones, because they don't necessarily, as they enter that middle-class sector for the first time, want to be traced back. They're reluctant to give out a lot of detailed information about their credit card, about their income, about elements of their life that they have not been able to or had to disclose in the past. So interesting, huge phenomenon of electronic media, yet again, going back to that privacy, they don't want to share that information with organizations in too much detail. Specifically the government, and there's income tax implications as it relates to that in some of these emerging economies as well. Next is the aspirational benefit. Again, I think there's a real obvious distinction between the developed nations where, when we look here in North America as an example, instantaneous and near cash rewards. Just look at the huge growth in cents off or rollback for the fuel programs in conjunction with some of the grocers. Look at the balance between what is near cash, in lane, instant, versus versus those that are aspirational. And again, in the emerging markets, they have a huge interest in the aspirational rewards as well. I think our experience as practitioners, though, is to offer a balanced amount of breadth and depth of rewards. Because in the end, we have not been able to figure out, we've looked at it analytically 10 times over, we have looked at it through research, we've looked at it through the socioeconomic variables that can be found. I don't think there's anyone who can actually predict when and how people are going to redeem. Some of the things that are interesting, you would think that it was driven by value. We found, and in one program that we operate, the worst value proposition when you exchange your reward points for a redemption is a gas card. So call it a $25 gas card. Worst value in the portfolio. Thousands of options to choose from, everything from in-lane redemption to flights around the world, and the gas card is the worst value. What do you think happens when gas prices go high? the redemption for the gas card goes through the roof because people feel, even though the value doesn't change, they feel like they're getting more for less. So I think the element here that we're learning in these emerging markets is a balanced approach towards aspirational and near cash rewards in conjunction with the opportunity to allow that choice to be made by the consumer. Next is a desire for soft benefits. And again, I think we've heard a lot of over the course of this morning already, a lot of desire to understand relevance within that. And I like Bill's comments at the end in terms of personalization. I think personalization, when done well, is probably the most powerful tool a marketer can have. I think when done incorrectly, it'll absolutely work against you. So the key is relevance. And, a lot of people look at individual campaigns, regardless of channel, regardless of segment, and they measure it by ROI. I think ROI is but one measure. ROA, which is return on attention, is another. Because if we had every single marketer who wanted to approach us, whether it was through our cell phone, whether it was through email, whether it's through a text, with the most relevant offer in the world, we would be inundated, absolutely inundated. So the key is personalization with those customers that want that personalization. So return on attention is one thing I think you need to be mindful of as you think about soft benefits and specifically personalization. Now let's talk about the US. What's happening in this crazy marketplace? Again, I think that it's hard when you think of a loyalty program and you think of any program has a strategy to it. And when you think of understanding a strategy that's going to drive a program, how can you enforce and implement a strategy when a CMO has a lifespan of 18 months to 2 years? Because all it means is you got that revolving door of people who come in and adopt the previously owned strategy and try and tweak it and try and move with it, etc. So I think the biggest thing is you've got to have an element of commitment for longevity. That would be the very first thing I would say that for organizations. The next one, and I'll talk about this towards the end, is it's well beyond the CMO. You need to have an enterprise-wide approach towards your loyalty program. If it just lives in marketing or it just lives within finance, it's not going to win. There's a company that we worked with once in the Canadian marketplace, a national program. And on their launch year, the board of directors and the CEO said, everyone at the vice president level and higher, 100% of your bonus is going to be tied to 3 metrics: enrollment, activation, comp store sales. Head of operations and IT said, whoa, I can't really influence that. Once it's in the hands of the marketers, I don't own the flyer. I don't know what happens at front store. I don't care. Every one of you, 75 executives, 100% of their bonuses year one, 100% on 3 metrics. Do you think collaboration occurred? Do you think that all of a sudden people were starting to work together that hadn't really worked together? Force and implement a strategy when a CMO has a lifespan of 18 months to 2 years. Because all it means is you got that revolving door of people who come in and adopt the previously owned strategy and try and tweak it and try and move with it, etc. So I think the biggest thing is you've got to have an element of commitment for longevity. That would be the very first thing I would say that for organizations. The next one, and I'll talk about this towards the end, is it's well beyond the CMO. You need to have an enterprise-wide approach towards your loyalty program. If it just lives in marketing or it just lives within finance, it's not going to win. There's a company that we worked with once in the Canadian marketplace, a national program. And on their launch year, the board of directors and the CEO said, everyone at the vice president level and higher, 100% of your bonus is going to be tied to 3 metrics: enrollment, activation, comp store sales. Head of operations and IT said, whoa, I can't really influence that. Once it's in the hands of the marketers, I don't own the flyer. I don't know what happens at front store. I don't care. Every one of you, 75 executives, 100% of their bonuses year one, 100% on 3 metrics. Do you think collaboration occurred? Do you think that all of a sudden people were starting to work together that hadn't really worked together? And it really did drive home a lot of element of making it enterprise-wide. So I think that's another key thing, is to have an organization believe in the strategy that's got to go throughout the organization. And I think the last thing, unfortunately, is the reality, the harsh reality of the pressure on financial performance. A lot of organizations are saying, what is this going to do for me in the next 2 or 3 quarters? Love the idea of a strategy around a loyalty initiative. What's it going to do? What will it do to my comp store sales in the next quarter? So, unfortunately, the financial markets are putting a lot of stress on organizations to perform, which causes more short-term thinking as opposed to what the long-term benefits of a loyalty strategy could deliver. Let's look a little further at it. Again, and these are similar numbers that were mentioned earlier. If you can't read the bottom one, there are over 2 billion US loyalty memberships. This includes multiple memberships. So, again, Bill quoted some numbers. The exact numbers I'll show you in a second here, but with 2 billion loyalty memberships in the US, and every one of them, look at those double-digit growths, whether you're grocery, hotel, specialty retail, airline, every one of them is growing at 20+%. So more and more people are picking up the cards, joining the loyalty programs. However, what's happening is the average US adult has 18 programs they belong to, but are only active in 8 of them. And if you actually break down active, they're probably only meaningful in 2 or 3 of them. So this is causing a great concern for marketers to be able to try and drive engagement, and more importantly, turn engagement into comp store sales. So here's my advice as it relates to your loyalty program and how to use it as a catalyst. Number one is you've got to differentiate through partnerships and through soft benefits. To be able to go and do a program on your own and to differentiate it in a unique way that is going to classify yourself alone in the industry is extraordinarily difficult. So you need to think beyond just your own walls. You've got to manage communications and benefits in order to drive engagement. Again, whether it's personalization, whether it's channel of choice, whether it's customized redemption experiences like we heard in the previous discussion, you must be able to do those things, because if you just have a vanilla type reward portfolio, it's not going to work. You've got to concentrate scarce resources into the areas that require them the most. And again, I think that this is one of the other things that specifically in the US marketplace, you hear more and more, can't get to it. IT couldn't even look at that. Love the idea, but we're focused on next quarter's flyer. We're focused on this. There's so much attention towards just driving home the regular churn of business that scarce resources are going to be another consideration for your loyalty program. And then let me talk about the use of data. So data is obviously been a theme of the workshops yesterday, of every presentation thus far today. Data needs to do a few things, and it's in this order, and I'm going to put a verb in between each one of these. The first thing is analysis needs to drive insights. You've got to be able, the analysis needs to be able to drive insights. If you cannot identify insights, then lots of data, lots of technology to churn through the data, but if it doesn't create insights for you, then it's not going to do anything. So number one, you've got to look for insights. Number two is you've got to turn insights, and this is probably the most important one, turn insights into decision making. So often you can come up with great insights, and many organizations have said over time, that's a nice insight, so what? So what? Wait till you sit in front of a head of category management and say, the way that you have, Rick, bought this category of product over the last 10 years has actually led to negative results. And as a result of that, we are going to change the way in which you buy your category. Wow. And that is now actually taking an insight and turning it into a decision. What that requires is a lot of change management. And I'll tell you what, unless you've got that enterprise-wide C-suite buy-in to your loyalty strategy, you're not going to get change management. Because at some point in time for chief marketing officer to talk to chief merchant and be able to say we need to do things differently, unless there's a collaborative buy-in there, you're not going to get a change management that's going to lead to different decisions. And then lastly, and it's funny that this doesn't often happen as well as it should, it's measuring results. And it seems like a simple concept, but once decisions are made through the drive of those newly created insights, you've got to measure the exact specific results and tie it back to comp store sales. And again, I think probably when we go through and meet with organizations, whether it's on the consulting side or the analytics side, and talk to them about different programs, different initiatives they've done, in the end, I think the most key financial metric you can look at is percent of affected sales. that an initiative will drive. And quite often you'll see these huge spiked ROIs, 1,000% here, 500% there. Yet in the end, what did it do to your comp store sales? Because the analysts, they're beating the hell out of you on your performance of your organization. And if overall financial demand and comp store sales increase is going to drive the end game for the success of your retail operation, or if it's receivables in the credit card marketplace, then how are you going to actually tie in measured results to financial performance? We actually think a CFO holds a bigger card than the CMO in making these kinds of decisions, because in the end, every marketer looks at the opportunity cost of dollars spent elsewhere. I can do it in loyalty, I can do it in pricing, I can do it in assortment, I can do it in channel, I can do it in social. You better be able to measure the opportunity cost of those decisions. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a situation where your comp store sales, your financial performance doesn't deliver what it needs to. Moving just very quickly into coalition as an example, as people talk about driving results and talk about coalition versus a proprietary program, some of the interesting things you need to look at are, what is the time to reward? Again, when you look at having multiple players, as you add more players, just like the final chart we saw in the previous presentation, more players to your portfolio, to your network of earning opportunities, you're creating greater value, both in the amount of potential household spend that can be captured, but also in the time to reward. And in every single case, worldwide, it's going to drive a higher value of reward, in other words, that dividend back to the consumer, which will in turn create that behavior change. Let me give you two very quick examples, live examples from two different programs around the world. Faster time to reward. What you've got here is a chart that shows how long it takes to reward in months across the bottom when you go to one partner only, general merchandise. And as soon as you add that second partner, time to reward's cut in half. Add 3 partners, cut in a third. Add 6 partners, a tenth of the time it takes to get that reward. That is the multiplier effect. That is the effect that a partnership or a coalition model can have. Another one which was quite astounding, and the y-axis here is spend at a grocery store. And you can see that if you go and use 5 of the partners in this program, your spend at that grocery store is twice as high as the average as if you're just that grocery store's customer. And what's really unique about this chart is 45% of that grocery store's customers, 45% of them are actually going to the 5+ sponsors. Gets back to percent of affected sales. You can put up a chart like that and say, yeah, but how many customers does that affect? 1,000, 1 million, etc. No. This affected 45% of our sales. That grabs the attention of the CFO and of the financial performance of the program. I think now in terms of choosing a path, whether it's standalone or coalition, here are elements of advice. Here are the 4 categories that I would say are the most important. So as you ponder your loyalty program, either existing today, perhaps new, whether it's a proprietary, a partner, or a coalition, these are, in my opinion, the 4 most important pieces of information you need to drive down on. The program's economics and the cost of the program. So as you look at that, it's everything from the financial performance of the program right down to liability management. It's a shame to see so many organizations who are veterans in loyalty tinkering with and adjusting the value proposition of the program only to conform with poorly executed liability management. In other words, if those outstanding points are driving your marketing decisions, you have not, in the outset of the program, put the financial rigor into building it. You've got to be able to look at points liability. Redemption should be great. It should be great because it's driving performance. It shouldn't be something that's hidden or buried or adjusted because you're trying to protect the financial performance of it. If you build and design a program that doesn't encourage redemption, don't do it. The value proposition, differentiated, we've heard that a lot, and sustainable. How can you create something that's sustainable, something that is going to actually live beyond a few months and getting that initial blip of success? How do you create something sustainable that's going to take you years past the initial launch of the program? And then the customer strategy. I think there's a lot of terrific opportunity in many organizations who are focusing on direct marketing, on one-to-one, on CRM, on channel, on social, on using that information, using the data and the analytics to drive those kinds of elements. But you really must have a customer strategy. It's amazing we get into some consulting engagements with organizations who, right at the outset, will say, why would you spend differentially one customer versus another? And you know, without looking at just the financial elements of the fact that certain customers are much more profitable than others, you've got to have the attitude to say, I'm okay not to spend against each customer differently. In fact, I'm okay to demarket. I don't want my poor customers to ever come in my store again. And once I know who they are, I'm not going to market to them. That's a part of a real strategy. And when it gets down to database, when you're thinking about partnering, or you're thinking about even a coalition model, think of these three words as it relates to database. Access, usage rights, and ownership. A lot of people feel that the complexity of database and of sharing of data is so foreign and so private and so exclusive that you can't get your heads around it. Trust me, there are very easy database principles and guidelines that can protect your organization, but also create opportunity for your organization in a shared environment to gain the right kind of access, usage rights, and ownership of data. And those are all different. Access is as simple as what information do I have and is available to me. Usage rights, what can I do? Can I rent it, sell it, make it available to others? Is it only for my specific use for certain campaigns? And then ownership, be it just ownership throughout the program or even in the exit strategy of a program, who and how is database actually owned? As I close off my last couple questions, how do we get the elephants to dance? The bottom line is what that means is, and I think Vegas is an interesting venue for it, is it's the big top circle and it's the trunks and tails holding each other and these big, huge mammals going around the circles in the same way at the same pace. The problem is getting these big organizations to work together is difficult. You've got brand issues. You've got database ownership issues. You've got, yes, that three-letter word, you've got ego, without a doubt. There's a lot of ways in which it's been difficult to get some of the big organizations to figure out ways to do it. The very three words that I think are most important as you contemplate it are communicate, what are the strategies, how are we going to go about it, collaborate, how we're going to take communication to the next point and actually understand what role does my company have versus your company in this. Is there a third-party company that should be involved to help us with certain aspects? With the idea of co-creating something. Not of taking my program and your program, but how do we co-create something that's greater for both of us? And then lastly, as I close here, is your company ready? And I would say these would be the four key elements to know whether you're ready for the next evolution of your loyalty program. First is you've got to know your objectives, and the objectives need to be broken into two elements: financial objectives, strategic objectives. Independent of each other, it's not going to work. Next is, are you going to be able to set measurable expectations? Is the organization going to be able to set expectations that are going to be measurable and that the organization is going to buy into? Next is identify competing corporate priorities, because if you go into something in loyalty, it's long-term. It's not something like a promotion that's going to move in and out. It's got to be a part of your corporate fabric for a long period of time. And if it is, then what that's going to do is create enterprise-wide readiness. And the organization's going to say, now is our time, we're completely committed to it, and here's how we're going to move forward with it. So that would be my four pieces of advice as you ponder either the expansion of your existing program, or you're looking at starting a new one, or you're looking at emerging into or driving a new initiative into an emerging country. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions for Bruce? Okay, I'll throw one out for you, Bruce. Going back to your earlier slides about that showed the sense of optimism in the developed world versus the sense of ennui bordering on panic we have here in the U.S. I'm wondering what role technology plays in that, because as you know, when you look outside in the developed world, you see a lot more innovation around mobile and those types of platforms, and they seem more interested in making that leap to next generation technology, and a lot of that's tied to infrastructure, but I'm curious as to what you think, or if any of the research you guys have done shows what role technology is going to play in the evolution in the U.S., and that's going to help fuel, you know, the renewed sense of optimism.
I think technology plays a huge role. I think even rollback or sense off in the petroleum industry is a great example of that. We're a strong believer of piloting and trialing, and I think there's a lot of great technology out there. again, associated with specific either devices or point of sale. I think that, again, with the right kind of financial expectations and measurements, technology can be a real driver of change for how you can actually enhance or generate your program. And I think there's a lot of great technology providers out there. I think they're anxious and willing to work with organizations to try and determine the answers. So I think technology is important. It's not going away. It's going to continue to evolve. And I believe that most organizations need to have a framework of innovation to be able to not own, but, you know, this is that decision, in-source, outsource. Where do you want to be? And my response would be I would encourage trial. I would encourage you to work with large technology providers who are experienced in their space because they know this stuff very well.
Great, thank you. And we're going to, we have one question here.
Return on attention metric, how do we measure it was the question. You know, it can be measured simply by response rate. You can get much more complex then and get right through, you know, if it's email into click-throughs, etc. But more importantly, it's for those customers who turn you off. So again, when you think of marketers, and it can be right down to a packaged goods company, you know, I've got the best new flavor of whatever soft drink or beverage, and I want to get right into that consumer may not want you. So I think what it is being okay with the fact that you can still have a customer, but not personalize and market uniquely to that customer because they may not want what you're trying to give them. And that's okay because they'll still be a happy customer.